What's going on, guys? Tyler here from Audioholics Unite, and today I am doing the very first episode in my series, Getting into Prog. If you need an explanation, please refer to the intro video I posted on Tuesday. I will put it in the playlist with this video as well as all future episodes of this series. Today I am talking about Dream Theater. Before I get into that, allow me to explain what motivated me to start this series. So for the longest time, I was never a fan of progressive music. I tried to get into bands like Dream Theater and Rush, but it just never really clicked with me. Not even bands like Symphony X, which to me is basically just progressive thrash metal, and you'd think being into bands like Metallica and Anthrax, that would be an easy, gateway drug for me, but it just never clicked. I don't know how it happened, but eventually, after months of trying to get into the genre, I think around August of last year, 2019, I listened to a Dream Theater record called Train of Thought. And that is when everything just clicked into place for me. From there, I re-explored Symphony X, Rush, and a few others. I got into a few acts, like Thank You Scientist as well, and that's when I decided I needed to listen to all of Dream Theater's discography. Please refer to my Wrong Opinion video on Dream Theater for my album ranking of their discography. And after I did that video, I decided that I wanted to dive face first into the genre as a whole, because I am unfamiliar with the vast majority of bands that are revered as the kings of the genre. Think Yes, Gentle Giant, King Crimson. I mean, I've heard songs here and there. Some of them I know quite a bit about, like Pink Floyd, but for the most part, I am completely new to this genre. And not only am I new to the genre, but I know next to nothing about music theory. I am just starting to learn. I'm in the beginner's stage of music theory. We're talking about rhythm right now in the book I'm reading. So, please don't expect me to go on about how Dream Theater's 9/8 groove is so amazing and its tonality and the key and whatever. I don't know what the fuck any of that means. So, if you're expecting that from me, well, you're not going to get it. If, however, you are looking for a layman's perspective, someone who's completely new to the genre, someone who isn't familiar with all of that terminology, someone like that, then this is the video series for you. And if you are someone like that, or just someone who wants to get into prog, please follow along with this video series, as I will be announcing the albums I'm going to be talking about next week at the end of this video, so that you have a week to listen to them yourself. Alrighty. So, this video, I decided to start with Dream Theater because I only just listened to these albums for the Wrong Opinion video. It may be interesting to compare my gateway drug, Dream Theater, to a lot of the other albums I will be covering in future episodes, such as like Gentle Giant, Yes, Pink Floyd. And that brings us to the feature presentation. The first album is 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, and it is a loose concept record on mental illness. I will say loose because there are a few songs that are a bit, completely unrelated to that concept. But overall, most songs are about mental illness in some form. Okay, let's just get into the tracks then, yeah? So the album opens with a heavy song about alcoholism, The Glass Prison, and it is the first song in the 12-step suite that Mike Portnoy will write about Alcoholics Anonymous throughout his time with Dream Theater. The riffs in this song are heavy, and I love almost all of them. The solo sections are fantastic. I especially love that Asian-sounding part that leads into some really heavy riffing at around the 11-minute mark. The lyricism is honest and brutal. I'd say this is probably the most well-written song from the 12-step suite, and I'm not just talking about the lyrics. The song structure, the composition, it is top-tier Dream Theater. I mean, it's top-tier of all time, not just Dream Theater. I love the chorus in this track. It's one of the better hooks Dream Theater has written over the years, and you'll hear me say that a few times on this album because this album has some really fucking good hooks, in my opinion. And finally, I want to mention that I really love the outro in this track. It's probably my favorite Dream Theater outro. Overall, this is a great opener and actually one of my favorite Dream Theater tracks because Although I think it's a little unfair to compare it to songs like Octavarium, A Change of Seasons, Illumination Theory. Those songs are prog epics, so it's just not fair. But if you compare it to songs of a similar stature, then I think it stands on its own as one of the best. Alright, so let's get into the second track, Blind Faith. Yeah, this is one of the weaker songs on the album. Not to say it's bad. I do actually enjoy this song a fair bit. It isn't quite as good as The Glass Prison, but it is still really cool on its own. I really dig the choruses in this song. It's not as much that it's a catchy chorus, it's the riff that totally makes it work. And this is one of those songs I mentioned that doesn't really fit the concept at all, as it is an introspective track about religion, and I mean, I guess some people view religion as a mental illness, but that's still quite a stretch. So, but despite having almost nothing to do with mental illness, I don't think it feels completely out of place. It does kind of fit, in a weird way to me. I really enjoy how this song ramps up after the first chorus to a heavier verse, and when it comes back to the chorus, I actually think it sounds heavier than the first time around. I think it is literally the exact same thing. I don't think they do anything different in the second chorus, but for some reason, after going from that heavier verse, it just sounds heavier. Overall, it's a really good song, but it does fall into that trap that Dream Theater has the tendency to do, which is that it drags. Sometimes Dream Theater can't just let a 5 or 6 minute song be a 5 or 6 minute song. They have to stretch it to a 10 to 12 minute song, and this is an example of that. It's an enjoyable listen, but it should not be over 10 minutes. Okay, let's go on to the third track now, which is my favorite track from the first half of this album, Misunderstood. Now, this song talks about the difficulties of living with a mental illness. This song personally speaks to how I feel a lot of the time. I will, in the future, inevitably talk more about this, but for those of you who are unaware, I am autistic. Specifically, I have Asperger's syndrome. And unfortunately, bouts of depression and anxiety come with the package. It can genuinely feel a lot of the time, like, even though you may technically be surrounded by people, it still feels like you're alone, like you're in solitude. Even though you may know a ton of people, friends, family, acquaintances, it can still feel like you don't truly know anyone, and no one really knows you either. I always tell people it feels like this, like you're on a big island. And you're on the middle of it. You're in the middle of it. And you look around and you don't see water anywhere. And it feels like you're just in the middle of, a giant-ass state or something, like the U.S. It feels like there's no water around you. I mean, yeah, if you walked a few miles, you would see water. But sometimes it just feels like it's not there. And the water in this analogy is obviously the people in your life, your family, your friends. Sometimes it feels like you're so far away from them that they don't exist. And that's one struggle when it comes to being autistic, because, there's a lot of things about it that people they don't understand, even family, even friends. And it's the same thing with you. As an autistic person, there's just some things that you will never understand about your family and friends. So often it can feel like don't even know each other. And it's really depressing. It's really oppressive. This song captures that feeling better than probably any other song I've ever heard, other than one later on this album. And for that, I absolutely love it. Beyond it being a song that is very personal to me, the music is just fantastic, guys. I mean, even without the lyrics, this song nearly brought me to tears. It has some of the most beautiful melodies. And, guys, it's just really good, okay? It's a 9-minute song, so it's not like it's a short listen, but it is worth almost every minute. The only thing I would maybe say as a criticism is that the last 2 minutes are kind of just the same thing over and over again, that one riff. Personally, I think it helps the theme of the song, but I usually turn it off at that point. So I could probably do without that ending, but, overall, this is one of those songs that I think everybody should listen to. If you are someone with a mental illness, if you can relate to anything that I've said about it, if you know someone personally who has a mental illness or someone personally who could relate to something I've said, then this is a song that will speak to you on a level that you probably aren't expecting from a Dream Theater album. All right, I think I have talked about that song enough. Let's move on to the next song, The Great Debate. And I promise this wasn't intentional. I just don't really have much to say about this track. It is really good. I really like some of the hooks on it, specifically the Life to Save Life hook that appears, I think, twice. I'd say it's about on par with Blind Faith. It also doesn't fit the concept of the album since it's about stem cell research and specifically the debate on stem cell research. It does a good job of presenting both sides of the argument fairly and doesn't really take a side in the track, which is neat, but I could totally do without the 2.5 minutes of sampled quotes in the beginning and also I don't think I actually figured out how long it was, but the ending as well. I feel like it's completely unnecessary, and I don't really want to hear it. I almost always skip it when I'm listening to this song, and I expect most people do the same. If you want to hear spoken word over some heavy riffing, I mean, go listen to Lulu by Metallica. Yes, I just compared Dream Theater to fucking Lulu. Fuck you. All right. The next track, Disappear. Hands down the worst song on the album. It is still really good, though. Just listen. I've never liked Dream Theater ballads for the most part. There are a few I enjoy, mostly on the album I'll talk about next. But this is not one of them. I don't like it. It's not bad. I won't skip it, but it's just not my thing. If it is your thing, it can be your thing. I'm fine with that. I'm not saying it's bad, just not for me, okay? And that brings us to the last track, the title track, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Now, I'm going to talk about this song in one fell swoop rather than its individual parts, because if I did that, we'd be here all week. This is just art, guys. This is true art. If an elitist snob came up to me like, oh, I haven't heard true art out of music since Beethoven. Well, first of all, I'd tell him he's full of shit. But then I would point to this song. If someone came up to me and said, what is the best song ever made? This is one of the ones that would immediately pop in my head. One by Metallica, Octavarium, this song. Off the top of my head, that's all I can think of, to be honest with you. It is just amazing. Vision by Haken is another one of those. And I believe Haken is on my schedule at some point. They're actually my favorite progressive metal band that I have heard so far. But I haven't actually heard their entire discography, so I've chosen some albums I actually haven't heard before. Anyway, we'll get to that in a future video. Let's keep talking about 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. This song details 6 different characters with a different mental illness. Now, first, we have a woman with bipolar disorder, who we will actually revisit later in a reprise. Next, we have a man who suffers from PTSD. And then after that, we have a man with schizophrenia. And then a woman with depression. And then we have Solitary Shell, which gets a shout-out because this is the second part of the album that got me very close to tears. It is about autism, and for the aforementioned reasons when talking about Misunderstood, it really, really speaks to me. I mean, guys, for those of you who don't have autism, you have to understand that you don't understand what it's like to have autism. I have never heard a song that truly captures the feelings and the experience of having autism. And I don't think this one does it perfectly, but it is probably the closest I have ever heard to a song capturing the essence of what it's like to be autistic, to be living in that solitary shell that you put over yourself because you're afraid of being yourself, because being yourself got you ostracized your entire life. You know, you put on this facade to appeal to the people around you, to fit in. But the truth is that's not you. That's your shell. And the truth is that you're alone on the inside. You can't let anyone there because they wouldn't understand you. Now, I'm lucky enough to have someone who I feel comfortable with enough to drop my solitary shell and let her see who I really am. But I know plenty of people don't have that who are autistic, and I didn't have that for a very long time. This song is very special to me for that reason. And if anyone watching this knows someone who is autistic, or maybe you are autistic yourself, I think this is one of those songs that will really, really speak to you. And I know I call it a song. It's actually part of 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, the song. In the album, it's split up into parts, and this is one of the parts. It is something I would recommend to you. All right, let's go on. So, finally, we have a girl going through dissociative identity disorder, and that's the final grand finale of the entire song. Overall, this song is a real treat for the ears, and if you are someone who has any of these mental illnesses, or even a mental illness that wasn't talked about, if you're someone who knows someone with any of these mental illnesses or a mental illness that wasn't talked about, this song, and frankly this album as a whole, will speak to you on a personal level. And that is the biggest compliment I can give a piece of music or a piece of art in general. So we're going to go to the conclusion now. There is a reason this album is a contender for my favorite album of all time. It's not just my favorite Dream Theater record. It is just something that spoke to me so personally that it's really hard to describe to you guys how greatly it impacted me as a person since I've listened to it. You know, this is an example of art that is good on its own, right? The music is absolutely fantastic on its own, but the meaning behind it, the meaning that you take from it, what it means to you, that's something that not a lot of albums can boast. You know, you might have nostalgia for an album like Ride the Lightning by Metallica or Back in Black by AC/DC, but I doubt either of those albums helped you through the loss of a loved one or, you know, helped you cope with having autism or bipolar disorder. This is an album that can help you through a lonely night, and it can really help you get through those tough times. If you're someone who's just lost a loved one, Disappear is probably a song that's going to deeply affect you. If you're someone who is like me and you have autism, Misunderstood, Solitary Shell, those songs are going to speak to you on such a deep level. This is an album that is transcendent of a lot of other albums because of that. There is an aspect to it that is just above most music. I think it was a philosopher named, I think it's pronounced Montaigne or maybe Montaigne or some shit like that. He once said that the value of a book is determined on how well it can get you through a lonely night or how well it can help you figure out the meaning of life versus just robotically stating facts or being a good poem. And I think that applies to everything, including art. You can have art that's just good, right? Like Ride the Lightning, and that's still art, but the art that can help you get over the loss of a loved one or help you understand your purpose in life, that is an album that is just transcendent of the other ones. And that's what I think 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence is. Okay, so what would I rate this album? I would rate it a 10 out of 10. I hope I didn't bore you too much with all that talk about how superior this album is to most other albums, because now we're going to move into the one I'm sure you were all waiting for, Scenes from a Memory. Okay. I am going to start this by saying I am going to get into the story of this album in depth. Okay, so if you haven't listened to this album before, please go listen to it on your own, okay? I can just summarize my thoughts on it now. It is absolutely fantastic. I love every song on it, and the story is extremely well written. Great. Now that you know my thoughts on it, go check the album out for yourself and listen to it and read the story on your own, because listening to me summarize the story of each track is not a replacement for experiencing it yourself for the first time. All right, well, if you're still here and you haven't heard the album before, I can't make you go listen to it on your own, so we're just going to get into it. The first song is called Regression, and this is almost ASMR-like in its production quality. It's very crisp, it's very relaxing, which it should be, because it's supposed to represent the hypnotist leading Nicholas, the main character, into regression, into hypnosis. And that leads us smoothly into Overture 1928, which is a instrumental that is supposed to represent Nicholas coming to terms with being under hypnosis. This is the best overture Dream Theater has ever written. Now, on the last album, there was an overture that introduced all the musical themes and ideas for 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, the song, and this does much the same thing, but it does it better in practically every way. This is a beast of a song. This is a really good introduction to the musical themes that we'll hear throughout the album, and I would give it special props as one of the best instrumentals Dream Theater has ever written, just on its own. It leads us into Strange Deja Vu, which is the first real song with vocals on the album. I think every song on the album is amazing, but this song especially has some really awesome melodies, and I really love the outro of the song as well. I also absolutely love the groove at around 2.5 minutes in. That, for some reason, has always given me like a Dick Dale kind of surf rock feel to it, and I fucking love it. Story-wise, this song introduces the main premise of the story. The main character, Nicholas, is having dreams or nightmares about a girl who he feels is strangely familiar. This girl's name is Victoria. As the song goes on, we learn that Victoria's life is like strange deja vu to Nicholas, and he is determined to figure out what is happening to her and why she is haunting him. Now, this is a great introduction to any story, because it smoothly introduces the premise of the story, and it gets us interested in the mystery. What is going on? Who is Victoria? Why is Nicholas having nightmares or dreams about Victoria? That is just great storytelling. It's a hook. Now, I think we can all agree that this album has a great premise. Whether or not you agree the album from here on out takes that premise and uses it well, that's up for debate. Personally, I think that this is one of the best stories, if not the best story ever told in an album. But I can understand why some people might find it stupid. That said, I think, like I said, we can all agree that the premise, at least, is fantastic. So the next song we have is Through My Words, which is a neat little ballad that, similar to Regression, leads smoothly into Fatal Tragedy, which is one of my favorite tracks on the album. But its placement is on purpose because it actually establishes a major plot point, which is that Nicholas is the reincarnation of Victoria. So, Fatal Tragedy. Now, this is a standout track. I love how it opens with Labrie softly singing, "Alone at night." It makes you feel like you're the one alone at night, walking down an empty, dark street. It's so dark and moody, and then it immediately and abruptly transitions into some Black Sabbath-esque tritone usage. Oh, if there's ever a point in this album where I just make a stank face, it's right there. And then it immediately transitions into one of my favorite grooves of the whole album. This whole song has such a feeling of darkness around it. I wouldn't say it's darkness in the same vibes as, like, Candlemas or something like that, but it's dark in sort of like a haunted mansion kind of feel, like a fun way. Like I said, I really love the groove as soon as that tritone is over and the vocals kick back in. It's absolutely fantastic. And then, the chorus is really, really good also. This song is just amazing. And as for the story beats, this is where we learn that Victoria was actually murdered, hence the dark theme. And we actually learn this from an old man. Now, this is where I'm going to note that one of the things that I feel is a mark of good storytelling is when you create a story that is so interesting and mysterious that fans will then create theories surrounding the open questions and loose ends of the story. One of the questions that people have after listening to this is, where is the reincarnation of Julian? Well, a lot of people actually think the old man in this track is the reincarnation of Julian, not just because he tells Nicholas about Victoria's murder, but because he actually seems to know more than he lets on, which he would if he were the reincarnation of Julian. It's a neat little factoid. It may not be true, but it would be really cool if it is. So the next song, Beyond This Life, is actually my favorite song on the album. I love the chorus in this song. The melody really clicks with me. The song also has some punk/grunge influence in the riffs, which is cool. I really love the grooves introduced during the solo sections. As far as story beats, this song is really, really important. In this song, Nicholas learns through a newspaper article that Victoria was murdered in a lover's spat with her boyfriend, Julian. The article claims that when Julian learned Victoria was having an affair, he killed her and then himself in guilt. Supposedly, a suicide note was found on his body by investigators that proves this account true, and these details were provided by a witness named Edward. Now, Nicholas doubts this explanation as being true and continues to search for the truth, which leads us into Through Her Eyes, which is a ballad. I think the melodies and the hook are really good in this song, and that's why the song works, but it definitely is not on the same level as Strange Deja Vu or Fatal Tragedy. In this song, it is made absolutely clear that Nicholas feels the same emotions Victoria had. In fact, he compares her loss to losing a loved one, despite never knowing her. I think, personally, that the lyrics makes him... It makes it feel like Nicholas feels as if Victoria and himself are one and the same. Because in the chorus he says, "I'm living my life through her eyes." And there's a few other lyrical anecdotes which basically say that he feels he is Victoria, because he is the reincarnation of Victoria. So that does make sense. And when he compares her loss to losing a loved one, maybe that could be because he feels like he is the one who has died. And that's why he's so motivated to figure out what happened to her. So the next song is the standout on this album. It's not my personal favorite track, but it is one of the most mind-blowing and amazing tracks I have ever heard. Everything about it is masterful. The lyricism, instrumentals, vocals, and we get a lot of story on this track too. Nicholas goes to Victoria's house and learns that Julian was a gambler and an alcoholic. These habits forced Victoria to seek comfort in the arms of his very brother, Edward, who we now know was the witness of the newspaper article. The song goes over how Edward actually loves Victoria, and his love for her outweighs his guilt towards his brother, and thus he decides to, seduce Victoria despite the fact that she is with Julian, his brother. You know, as the song says, deception, dishonor, he doesn't care because he loves Victoria so much. And then we have the Dance of Eternity, which is hands down the best instrumental Dream Theater has ever made. It represents Edward seducing Victoria. So then we have One Last Time, which is another softer song, but this one is way better. I don't think I'd call it a ballad. It's just softer. The chorus is an earworm that will latch onto you for days. There is a reprise of it, actually, in the last track. In this song, Nicholas learns that Victoria planned to break up with Edward, and this is where he learns that Edward was the true killer. So then we have The Spirit Carries On, which is my least favorite track on the album. It is still really good, and I love it, but it is the least good, in my opinion. It is a ballad, like Through Her Eyes, just not as good, in my opinion. There is a ton of foreshadowing what happens on the last track in this one. The big story beat here is that Nicholas believes he has appeased Victoria by learning who her true killer is. And he's going to expose it, but Victoria appears to him as a spirit and tells him that he needs to move on with his life. And due to that, he decides that he is ready to get along with his life. So now we have the final track, which is another standout. The melodies, instrumentals, it all blends together here in a wonderful grand finale. I really love the reprise of One Last Time after we hear Edward shoot Victoria and Julian, because whereas in the song One Last Time, it did sound sad, here it's dark. It's much more dark and depressing than it was before, because this time we know that they mean it literally, because Victoria is dying on top of Julian. Story-wise, this song we actually learn what happened, though Nicholas doesn't. Edward learned of Victoria's plans to break up with him and go back to Julian, and in a fit of anger, he killed both his brother and Victoria. He then made it look like Julian has done the deed and posed as the witness. It is here that the big plot twist is revealed. The hypnotist is actually the reincarnation of Edward, and the album ends with him killing Nicholas in the same way Edward once killed Victoria. Now, one thing I love about this album is that there's a part in the song right before the reprise of One Last Time where you can hear them arguing, and then he shoots Julian, and then he says, "Open your eyes, Victoria," and he shoots Victoria. And that's where we're all supposed to click. Fuck, the hypnotist is Edward's reincarnation. And if you listen closely, you can hear Nicholas drive off after the hypnosis is over. And the song suddenly changes into something dark, and you can hear another car drive after him. And then when he gets into the house and he puts on the record player, he says, "Open your eyes, Nicholas." Nicholas screams, knocks the record player over, and presumably gets shot in much the same way that Victoria was. So, what do I think of this story? I mean, I can understand why some of you might feel that's a really stupid plot twist, but I actually think that it was foreshadowed going back many songs, because the hypnotist constantly talks about how the spirit carries on, it moves on, and, you know, he constantly talks about, you know, concepts such as fate, whereas things that happen to your past life will eventually happen to you. I mean, you can look up anecdotes in the lyrics. The hypnotist actually talks a lot more than people remember he does. And there's actually a fair amount of foreshadowing when Edward has his lines that he may be the reincarnation of Edward. So, because of that, I don't feel it's a stupid plot twist. It's kind of like The Sixth Sense, where they laid enough clues throughout that if you were really paying attention, you could have feasibly figured it out. Now, I had to talk about the story a lot more here because, in my opinion, this is the best rock opera that has ever been made. This is even one of the best concept albums of all time, if not the best concept album of all time, in my opinion. The music is so phenomenal, and it fits the story so well that what can you complain about? The story has so much depth to it. Like I said, there's a ton of foreshadowing the ending where Nicholas dies, and honestly, that is some writing on a level most movies are not even at these days. All in all, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I hope that those of you who don't like it can at least see why that would be. All right. That brings us to the end of this video. I know this was a little bit of a retread of what I said in my wrong opinion video, but I wanted to start somewhere a little bit more familiar with this series. Also, I felt that I just didn't do Scenes of a Memory justice in that video because I didn't talk about the story, so I really wanted to talk about it a lot more here. So did these albums make me a fan of Dream Theater? Well, yes. I mean, I was a fan before, but after hearing these albums a few times, Dream Theater wasn't just a band I listened to on occasion. Dream Theater was cemented as one of my favorite bands, and the gateway drug that I needed to explore the other artists in this series. In the next video, I will be exploring an artist that I have absolutely no familiarity with, Gentle Giant. I will be I will be talking about the albums In a Glass House and Octopus. Thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you in the next video. See you then!